Hi, my name is Clara Maya. I'm one of the organizers of Fridays for Future. We're, by the way, having our next strike on the 25th of September, so I hope we'll all see you there. I'm very happy to be the moderator of a session today with two very interesting authors, one being Thomas Köck, who co-wrote a play called Die Zukunft reicht uns nicht, klagt, Kinder klagt, which roughly translated means the future is not enough for us or to us. And I'm very happy to also greet Saci Lloyd, who is the author of The Carbon Diaries. Thank you for being here. Hello.
Hiya, very happy to be here.
Hi.
So a question for both of you, actually. So although the climate crisis is such an important topic, not many books and literature exist on that topic, especially with a focus on youngsters. What were your thoughts on writing about this topic, and what were your intentions? Saci, would you like to start?
Well, I never quite know why I do anything really, but I am and have been a teacher for a long time in an inner city college in London. And so I think it felt like a natural fit to write, but I don't actually really write for young people. I just write, and then the marketers decide where the books belong. But there's my real starting point was that I really cared about climate change, and I did lots of research, and the news was so terrible, but I really wanted to make a lot of jokes about it, and I wanted to write something funny about it. And one of the models for that, there was this great book when I was growing up called The Diary of Adrian Mole, in which he's this really bored, terrible teenager. And it was almost that more than anything else. It's that I didn't want to write about climate change, and I didn't want to write about vegan girls with braces trying to change the world. I didn't want to write about polar bears. I didn't want to write about the thing. What I wanted to write about was the story of a family falling apart when you squeezed them. That's what I wanted to write. And climate change was there, but it was the canvas, the background in which they lived. That was the kind of starting point for me.
Interesting. Thomas, do you write the play having young people in mind? What were your intentions writing it?
Well, I actually started writing about climate change and climate crisis back in 2015 with the trilogy. It's called the Climate Trilogy, and I was researching basically on notions of exploitation and capitalism, and was working on the theories by Timothy Morton and on hyperobjects and dark ecology and stuff like that. And I was heading more and more into questions of historical guilt, like the process of exploitation that you cannot, that you have to deal with it now. You cannot undo it. It's done. So the consequences will come anyway, which is in theater interesting because you deal with a tragical problem. So everyone sees it, but you can't solve it, and that's tragic. And that's something I was researching a lot and thinking a lot about all this kind of historical, how do you say, historical problems, or also problems of climate change as an historical thing that started centuries ago, in a way. And that's how I came to this trilogy that dealt a lot with questions of time also, and it's like that. And then afterwards, I wanted to go more into the notion of inheritance, the question of what do younger generations inherit from the generation now, which was something that funnily turned out to become a big topic for Fridays for Future, of course. And when I started with this, thinking about having young people in mind, not as an audience, but as partners. Like as someone, I wanted to come up with the notion of inheritance and ask young people, what do you think? How do you deal with this world that you were going to inherit from another generation? Which is, of course, also kind of a punk attitude, because you have this imagery of no future generation in the 70s and 80s. So it's always, there is a lot of energy in it. So that's something I was working on when I was starting to write this play for the choir of young people, which we then cast also. Yes, so that's the short version. Sorry.
Well, both of your books create a struggle between the generations, or both of your works do. And why did you think that was necessary? Isn't it important to come together as a whole society to tackle this crisis, and keeping in mind that over 70% of CO2 emissions come from the 100 largest companies? Is it correct to critique the older generations like that instead of the companies? Maybe Thomas, would you like to start?
Yeah, well, basically that's how I address the whole topic. In the climate trilogy, it's the question is like, it's not the 100 companies, but it's basically the whole system. You cannot, for me, it doesn't work. For me, it doesn't work to think of a green capitalism and stuff like that. It simply doesn't work. It's like, you live in a society that wants to create surplus value out of cheap nature, as it is called in theory. Like, people don't think that nature people think that nature is free. So, and that's how you create surplus value out of the stuff. So there is no, and if you make certain products a bit more expensive, you end up having other things getting cheaper, because you have to keep the wage in a system that works like that. So it's basically, that's why I don't think it's about 100 companies, and it's not about certain individuals, but it's about the whole system. And that's what I try to think about, considering these historical questions and stuff like that. And just one point I did not... no, that's fine. Sorry.
Actually, coming to you, there was a scene in the book where the mom talks about how her generation did everything incorrectly, and she really felt bad for her children. Why do you think it was necessary to include that generational conflict?
Firstly, just to address Thomas's point, he said, the situation where everyone's watching everything go wrong, and that he calls that a tragedy. I call that a comedy, which is where I come from. I just think it's ridiculous. I know, exactly. Because it is intergenerational conflict. And, I think that, there's a role in all of these things for guilt. There is, but, there's that question, what did you do when you knew? So, a lot of these previous generations didn't know. But it's at that point where you actually understand, where you decide not to shut your eyes and ears, and you understand, what do you do from that point onwards? Guilt doesn't, it has a function, but guilt keeps you in status. What you have to do is address that guilt and then move forward. And I think that it's okay to feel guilty, and it's a good starting point. But it's like that thing of, okay, the past is a foreign country. What are you going to do today? What are you going to do now? Don't wallow in this. And I do, and I have done for 15 years, events with young people all around the world. And I always hate that thing where somebody will always get up and say, okay, it's down to your generation. And all the kids are sitting there and they're 14, 15, 16. And they're like, we're not the ones with the credit cards. We're not the ones with the jobs. Excuse me, actually, it's you guys who need to do something first. Okay, we will take over that mantle later, but stop laying it all on the younger generation. So I think there is a certain level of conflict. And that conflict is because things aren't fair. There is no intergenerational fairness now. Young people have been given a rotten deal. You know, I mean, not just a rotten deal, not just a temporary recession, not just a bit of sexism or like not equal pay in the workplace. This is an existential bad deal. And, you know, so of course there is conflict there. And, you know, where there's conflict, there's drama. So, and that's the job of probably of the author and the dramatist, is to look for conflict. And what I would hope is that there are 1,000 creatives creating. Some are looking at companies, some are looking at the whole picture, some are looking at, you know, a tiny person's meltdown somewhere, some are looking at the conflict in the family. You know, it's not down to one author to write, you know, the overall novel of everything. We each pick our section, but what you're looking for is more and more people delivering, you know, and writing about these things. But what I think happens is, what makes great drama is where great drama happens around characters and plots and people and conflict. And even though these issues are massive, they have to be integrated into people's lives. Otherwise, you get this wooden dialogue, people saying, but what about the corporations? Nobody talks like that. Nobody talks like that. So you have to make the characters believable and flawed and messy and full of conflict and issues. And in that way, I think you create great art.
Okay, thank you for that answer.
May I add a point?
Yes.
I think because one point that also interested me when I was doing research was actually that I found out, yeah, there is not really, like, you have apocalyptical literature in a classical way, a lot about the end of the world and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You have climate change as a topic that mainly is portrayed in the desertification of lands and stuff, like in 2000 years and stuff like that. And one interesting book I read was by Amitav Ghosh, who is an Indian philosopher. It's called The Great Derangement. And he basically, why this book is interesting, because he actually tackles the problem that certain questions like climate change appear not in the classical literature, bestseller literature, because that is focused very much on individual and psychological problems that we all can relate to in modern times, let's say. And the topics like climate change, they exist, but they are in science fiction. And the funny thing with science fiction, even if, although it bears the name of science in its genre, it's considered like the most fictive fiction ever. So it doesn't really, it has nothing to do with our lives. That's what they tell you if you're looking for science fiction. It's like, yeah, it's like fantasy novels with robots. So, and that's something he discusses a lot in thinking about why, if we are not capable as a society to imagine that climate change is a real individual afflicting problem, like this is something that afflicts us as a society. This is, if we as a society think this is fictitious in a way science fiction and Star Wars is, then we can, then the real problem is that we cannot even discuss this problem in real political talks, because it would always be in our heads as a kind of Star Wars desertification of something lands. And this is something I very much, very clever, I think. So.
Thank you for making that point. Coming right back to you, Thomas, there was a scene in your book where the teenagers seemed to have the intention of murdering their mother, who couldn't handle her work-life balance. Isn't the criticism of mothers leaving their stereotypical positions in society to pursue a career sexist? Is this an appeal for mothers to resume their role as childbearers as their only sense in life? Why did you choose the mother as the one to be killed because of her failed work-life balance, not the father? What was your intention?
Could you repeat the second question? Because there was this horror movie sound.
Why did you choose?
No, the one before.
What do you mean? Is it
before sex? After sexist?
Okay. Whether this is whether this could be understood as an appeal for mothers to resume their role as childbearers, as their only sense in life and society, and why you chose the mother and not the father, and isn't there a certain responsibility literature has to not reinforce sexist stereotypes to a certain extent? Do you see that responsibility, and why did you choose the mother and not the father?
Yes, I do see this. Responsibility very much, and I do see the responsibility to read carefully and not ask writers for intention, because you might end up in hell. After the kids try to murder their mother, she actually bursts out into laughter and says, "I'm not your mother," because she is not a mother. She's a seer. How do you say? She's called Cassandra. So there is a huge misunderstanding going on, and she actually, how do you say? She actually dismisses this idea at all. And for me, it's not the problem is not that you have a mother that is leaving a certain role or something, but the problem is individualization, which actually might lead to, as we saw during the Corona crisis again, if you put the families at home and you say, there's not a problem, everyone works at home, and then you have parentheses and mothers next to it, they should take care of the kids also and not only work at home. And that's a kind of a stereotypical patriarch, capitalist, systemic action that again took place here. And that was more of the things we discussed when we were producing Die Zukunft reicht uns nicht, that it's not about her not leaving a certain role model or stuff like that, but she bearing the double weight, taking care of kids and having to work, which is something I witnessed and I have experience with, and other people, which is a problem. I mean, during Corona crisis, you could see it again. It's like people were running out to the windows, applauding the workers, the hospitals, which are mainly, like in statistical sense, women, but their wages have not been, how do you say, angepasst, fixed until now, I think. So that's a problem that capitalism has with female, how do you say?
With work predominantly performed by female people.
Yes.
Yeah. I work in intensive care. I know. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Very interesting.
So I hope that's a good point for you. That's a good answer for you.
Yeah, very interesting. I hope for the viewers too. Saci, a long question for you actually. The book could be considered as a soft dystopia. What irritated me, however, was that the climate crisis itself didn't seem the focus of this dystopia, but that the legislative measures that the government were what was actually staged as the real catastrophe to a certain extent. Don't you think that it is important to give positive concepts of how a carbon neutral future, a future in which we tackle the climate crisis, may look? And the criticism I saw in your book was that the combination of a climate crisis in full force in combination with the harshest measures that are unfortunately too late was the real crisis. What I got from your book is that we have to act fast and proactively prevent such harsh measures as are necessary in your book. However, I know a lot about the climate crisis, and do you think your readers who may not know as much will see the nuance, or do you think they will take away that all legislative measures will lead to a worse life?
That's the longest question.
I'm so sorry.
I can't even remember the beginning of it. I'm nodding like I'm listening. Okay.
I'm just really interested in this topic because, like, yeah. When I read your book, it just felt like the measures that the government were imposing were what were causing all this misery, not the climate crisis itself. And for me, it seemed like, to a certain extent, it gave the impression that to kids, all legislative measures are bad and lead to catastrophic turns in their life, which isn't it important to build positive perspectives to show kids how life could be?
Yes, but it's not very funny, so I just wanted to make some jokes. It's not very funny being positive. No, yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't write the same book now. I wrote this ages ago, you know, it's a really old book. And to be honest, nothing bad happened in the book at all in the first, I wrote it and everybody rejected this book. I mean, I wrote this in 2008, you know, it's a really long time ago. And every single publisher turned it down apart from one. And they just said, look, not enough happens. Can you make it more catastrophic? So before this, there were no catastrophes at all. It was just like people going, oh, and they're sort of falling apart a bit. And it was just funny, you know, in that kind of way. So I had to make it a bit more catastrophic. Yes, there could be many other books and many other ways to tell this story. I can't defend that. I was just trying to tell the story of a family. Well, I hope, actually. I mean, one of the underlying things for me writing this was lots and lots of research about wars, and the last war in particular, and the last time rationing came in. I don't particularly think there's going to be rationing. You know, I think it's quite old, this book. But a lot of people say that period of war and hardship and community, even though it was a very difficult time, it was a very happy time. And what I was hoping that was happening was that you got a sense of certain things being very hard, and certain, you know, like the gap year is cancelled, the car is rubbish, the dad loses his job. But then the dad gets this whole new lease of life. All the neighbours start talking to each other. Everyone tears all the fences down. And there's much more of a sense of community spirit. And that's kind of what I was going for, which is that, just get on with it, deal with it. And then, you know, like you were saying before, Thomas, about, you know, in a certain way, you can't just go for green capitalism. You've kind of got to tear the whole thing down and go for it again. It's a war footing now, really. And I think the sooner that people get on board with that and just be like, come on, let's go, the happier they will be. Because I think modern life is all about disconnection. And I think crises sometimes can be about connection.
It's just interesting for me personally because when talking to people while doing work with Fridays for Future, the thing we were most confronted with is people saying, oh my God, we'll lose everything. When legislative measures are imposed on us, we won't be able to drive our car, we won't see our family in other countries, we won't be able to go on holidays. And it's always really hard to then talk to people and convince them that, hey, life will be fine. I mean, we can still have a nice life while having legislative measures from the government, while stopping the climate crisis. The real issue is not solving the climate crisis, and then we'll have a problem. So that's just why that question was interesting for me personally.
Yeah, I think it's a really completely valid criticism. And my only weak defense is I was trying to make some jokes, really, and trying to kind of do it in a certain kind of way. I think I wouldn't write it probably in the same way now. But I totally valid. I mean, I hope that the sense of community and happiness and connection also comes through, because that's what I was trying to show, is that those things make you loads happier. Money and all that shit, it's proven it just doesn't really work for happiness. These kinds of things, you know, connectedness, active citizenship, coming together, and a feeling of achieving something with your fellow man. These are the routes to happiness, you know? All the other stuff is just nonsense.
Following up, how would you write your book now? Because
that's a good question. What, with Laura being the same age?
Yeah, maybe. Just starting again from the very beginning.
My favorite movement is Friday for Future. I really like it. I went on a great march in Milan, and sometimes in Italy, you know, some of the southern European countries, you can really lose faith a bit, you know, because it just doesn't seem to be on the agenda for people. And my best times always in Italy are with younger people. I feel that the other people are quite insane. I feel really sane and normal with younger people, because I'm like, oh, we get it, right? And we've got to do something. So I think that I would, again, I wouldn't get too worthy, but I think I would focus it around a bunch of people like that, but show a bunch of people from, like Friday, Future Friday, kind of falling apart and having relationship issues and doing that kind of thing, but kind of in a more like, we're going to do something about this kind of a way. I think it would be something more like that, because my book to me now feels very old-fashioned. But they're hopefully making a TV series out of it in the BBC, and they've got a very young writer on it, and I'm kind of advising on that a bit. But really, we're completely throwing half of it out and really updating loads of things, because it needs a younger perspective. It feels quite old to me now, honestly.
Interesting. Thomas, what were some of the responses you got? Did people feel empowered to act on the climate crisis? Did they feel criticized personally? How were the responses of people that watched the play?
Let's see. Well, I think the most impact probably had this the most impact probably had Die Zukunft reicht uns nicht, the future is not enough, because it was also directed in a very empowerment mood and kind of a discussion between times and generations and stuff like that. And but there you had, like, in a sense, kind of very powerful reactions. Like, we had people, sorry to say that, but from the older perspective, who were leaving the theater and even yelling back at the kids. And because the kids were standing there just for you as a choir, and everything they said was a choir. So it was always like 14 people saying, I am getting fucked here. So, and then they discuss why are they getting fucked, and then they discuss historical, like the issues of early socialism, where you had the same problem, that the early socialists had said, hey, we can have like fairness in space, right? Everyone gets the same amount of space, but we cannot get fairness in time. Because if we work now for a better future, we are fucked, right? Because you will have a better future, but we are going to die. So there is a huge problem. Very early, it's around 1900, we are thinking now. There's a huge problem considering time and guilt again, which is, for me, a very interesting philosophical problem. So, but that was not the question. I'm sorry, but so people were running out at this moment when they said, there's no fairness in time, and then what do you want from me? And then they left the theater. And there was, when Fridays of Future came out, there was 2 shows which was basically visited by Fridays for Future, which was funny. And they liked it. They went out and went like Fridays for Future and stuff like that. So, but some of them also said they didn't understand what it was about, but it's cool. So you had like, but you also had, I don't know, when the last show I saw, someone was crying, a woman at the late 30s, something. I don't know why. So you had, I don't know, a whole range of things. And the climate trilogy worked different because it was shown in different spaces. So special, but I think maybe it's a Viennese thing. The show I saw in Vienna was also very, very confrontative, and then you have people in the front row applauding very loud into dramatic silence because they wanted to they wanted to say that they feel angry. So that was the audience.
Saci, what was the most interesting response that you got concerning your book?
Like Thomas, it's everyone's different. Everyone likes it and hates it and doesn't care about it in different measures. It's really different. It has people write to me. It's been translated into about 20 different languages, the Carbon Diaries. And people write to me all the time. Teachers write, they use it a lot in schools, the Carbon Diaries. And it makes me really happy, that's used. I quite like it when they're like, oh, this is stupid, or, we don't like this or that. Because it means they've just used it as a starting point to have their own thoughts, So it's fine for me. I have a question for you, actually. So I really liked Thomas's point about, I hadn't thought about that, fairness in time and fairness in space. That's a really interesting point. So I was reading, a Mother Teresa quote, yesterday is gone, tomorrow is the future, we only have today. So I would ask you a question about why Fridays for Future should be called Fridays for Future, and why shouldn't it be called Friday for Today?
Is that for me?
Yeah, I'm asking you a question there.
So, many people, many activists from Fridays for Future have already made that concern that it is Friday for now, especially because the climate crisis isn't some vague perspective of the future, but many people are already suffering under the effects of the climate crisis. And by framing it as the future, we're ignoring the fates of so many people, especially in the global south. So yeah, that is just a fair point to make. And a lot of people are currently saying we are in a crisis. The crisis won't come, but we are in a crisis. So I think it's just, I wouldn't call it an early on mistake, but it was just an early on thought process of an individual that caught on. But many people say Fridays for now because that's what it is. So yeah.
Yeah. Sorry to put you in the hot spot there.
No problem. Thank you for the question. Have children, were the responses also that children felt emboldened by your book to act, to do something against the climate crisis?
Yes, I mean, I've been doing this a really long time, and it's changed so much. I mean, I've lived through, when you're an author, you do lots of events and talks and presentations. So I've survived the vampire genre. I've gone through, all that Twilight stuff. I've gone through Harry Potter. I've gone through everything. And it was always those people like going, oh, witches and goblins and ghouls. And then I would jump up on a stage and go, hey, kids, carbon, come on. And everyone's like, who is this woman? And so I had to find, I became this treasure trove of funny YouTube clips and these really interesting interactive things and ways to engage with audiences and ways to create conflict. So I really worked at that for years. My favorite thing was there would always be, in any room I was in, there'd be some people who liked me, some people who didn't care, and there'd always be one boy in the corner who would hate me. Because everything I was saying, he was like, my dream job is to be a lawyer, and I want a Porsche, and I want to live my life how I want to live it, and you are standing in my way, bitch, and I don't want to hear this. And my job was always, I didn't want to change his mind, but it was always to make him laugh. And at a certain point, he would suddenly go like that, and I'd be like, yes, I got you. I'm starting to make you think, So I made them laugh, I made them think, I made them, do stuff. That's all you can do, So, and so now it's very weird for me walking in front of an audience who actually likes me and who actually wants to hear what I've got to say. It's, I almost don't know what to do with that crowd because I'm so used to coming out, So, I love it. I love to talk about climate change. There's one thing I find that I really need to address a little bit is that I'm a certain generation that was, there's certain things that are great for climate change people from my generation, which is that we often had very nature connected childhoods. We were often very free and unparented, and we often hung out with groups of other kids. Those three things, if you read books like Last Child in the Woods and things, they make a person really love nature. So when the climate change problem became evident to me, I was like, no, I love this. You can't have my rock pools. You can't have my beaches. It was a really visceral response. And what I'm scared about now is that young people, because they don't have those as many freedoms, they're not able to just sit and be free in nature and learn to love it, that they're climate anxious. And, they're like, oh, shit, we're going to die otherwise, if we don't get through this. And I really always try and convey a sense of wonder and love for the natural world. Because otherwise, if we're growing a generation that just feels protective and doesn't feel supported or loved by the world, That's a psychological issue, I think. I can't even remember what the question was, but I very much try and convey that. And I teach a lot to do with nature connection and going outside and just the wonder of the natural world.
Okay, thank you very much. Since time is running short, just one last question for Thomas. Do you think there's a certain responsibility talking about the climate crisis in the play? How would you consider the role of literature, especially in relation to the climate crisis?
Well, for me, as I said, what I always try to think is the connections between different topics that might appear disconnected, which happened very much in the climate trilogy, where the topic of colonialism and exploitation of nature, exploitation of labor power, exploitation of humans, and so on, like interconnected and made like, and for me, or at least that's what I tried to interconnect all these spheres and show that there is a certain ongoing process of exploitation that each and every region of life that suffers from. And that's something I think literature, that's an area where I think literature has a certain power to interconnect certain things that might appear disconnected because in the sphere of daily language, things or newspapers and stuff like that, you have like, there's a crisis going on there, there's a crisis going on there, but it doesn't connect to me. So, and then you show, no, it connects to your, that's what Timothy Morton with the hyper objects meant. It's like climate change is not, if you start your engine of the car, it's like bang, 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 all those different clouds of problems appear. So, and he also says climate change is, as I said, it's a hyper object. It's not like the one, it's something different than that the thing in Kantian theory or stuff like that. Like it's a huge thing that only exists because it is connected to so many things and to this system of exploitation, of course. And that's what we need to tackle. And I think, as always, that well, that's the power, I think, of fiction also. And because you Saci, you were just mentioning in a sentence witches and goblins and stuff like that. I mean, also here we have this daily imagery of witches, whatever. So, and then you start researching, get into the topic of witches, and you find out, no, it's actually independent women that have been slaughtered by the 100,000s, and actually their job was to heal the people. So then we are back at the female workers in the hospitals, and the progress of capitalism led to like the destruction or the killing and slaughter of these witches, which were actually independent women.
Yeah.
And that's something that interests me, like with the notion of fiction, to break up stereotypes of daily language, of daily histories, of things we are used to. Like we think the world has been like this for ages. And I don't think so. Like it has been produced like this, right? So the world has been produced to look like this, and you can go back in time to watch where it has took this gap and where it has took this gap, and you can try to connect stuff new, and suddenly things appear possible again. It appears possible again to change things because nothing is solid, right? So that's where, for me, the power of fiction comes in.
Thank you for that very interesting answer. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we can't really talk that longer, I think. But thank you all for being here. It was a very interesting and I feel stimulating talk. By the way, Fridays for Future has their next strike on the 25th of September. I hope you'll all be there. And it was nice to see you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, bye-bye.